Most people don't get up in the morning with the intention to wreck the planet. Most of us want a good future for our kids and our grandkids. Sometimes this is referred to as sustainability. Sustainability, the ability to be sustained, or in other words, to continue. And what is it that we want to see continued? People often think it's about the environment. I think it's more about our way of life. I like to think of sustainability as what the future requires of us. So what does the future require of us? And how can we build a sustainable future? Well, one thing I know for sure is that we can't forecast our way to a sustainable future. Forecasting is looking at past trends and projecting them out into the future, and then based on what seems to be happening, deciding what we should do. It's a really common way to plan in organizations. But we don't do that as individuals in our personal lives. Someone who's planning a move, for example, doesn't do so by analyzing the trends in their life, right? I started in New York, and then I moved to Chicago, and now I live in Calgary. It looks like I'm heading west. I should move to Vancouver, right? We don't do that in our personal lives. Thinking about the future based on the past is a bit like driving while looking through the rearview mirror. It's a risky way to drive. And what if the trends that we're forecasting out into the future are taking us to a place that we don't want, a future we don't want? What about the future we want? What about the future we need? So the alternative to forecasting is called backcasting. It's a fancy term, and it basically means beginning with the end in mind. So we put ourselves in the future that we want. We stand there and we look back to today in order to understand the gap, and then we get busy working to achieve our vision. It's pretty simple, really. There are two ways to backcast, and I'm going to describe them to you by talking about a couple of games. The first one is backcasting from scenarios, and that's like a jigsaw puzzle. Let me ask you this. When you're doing a jigsaw puzzle, how do you know that you have succeeded? How do you know you're done? You put the pieces together in such a way that it looks like the picture on the box, right? Okay, so that's like backcasting from scenarios. As a group, we come together, we imagine the future we want, we describe the picture of the future we want, and then we start working towards it. But what if we can't all agree on what that picture should look like? And also, what about technology that hasn't been developed or invented yet? Where does that show up in our picture of the future? So the second way of backcasting is called backcasting from principles. And the game analogy there is chess. When you're playing chess, how do you know you've succeeded? Checkmate. So you can play the game of chess 100 times, and it would look 100 different ways at the end, potentially, right? It might never look like the picture on the box, but you still know you've won. And why is that? It's because success is defined as a principle, checkmate. So the chess player has that principle in mind right from the start of the game, and they start playing, making their moves, guided by that principle of checkmate. They have to adapt to what the other player is doing. They don't know exactly what's going to happen, but they're always guided by the principle of checkmate. So the question is, what's checkmate in the game of sustainability? And you might be surprised to know that we can answer that question. In fact, 25 years ago, a group of scientists, led by Dr. Karl-Heinrich Robert, did just that. It starts by being clear on what the rules of the game are. And in this case, that's being clear about some important scientific concepts. Okay, things like biological and geological cycles and photosynthesis and the laws of thermodynamics. I've put all those concepts together for you on this one slide. Scientifically speaking, sustainability is about these cycles running forever. But of course they're not. We're intervening into the cycles and causing them to break down. We do it in 4 ways. There's us in the middle. The first way is we use material from the Earth's crust in such a way that it accumulates in nature. The second way is we combine molecules into more complex molecules that nature's never seen before, and so has a hard time breaking down within the regular cycles of nature. And in both of those cases, those substances start to accumulate in nature. The third thing we do is that we erode nature's capacity to run these cycles. So we use natural resources faster than they can replenish, for example. And the fourth thing we do is we create barriers to people meeting their needs. This is the social side of sustainability. So in a sustainable future, we're no longer doing these four things. That doesn't mean that we're not using any material from the Earth's crust, or that we're never using chemicals, or that we're never chopping down a tree. What it means is that we're using those materials in such a way that the cycles can continue, and they're not breaking down. So there you have it. Those are the principles that can guide us to a sustainable future. That's checkmate in the game of sustainability. Now, you might be asking yourself, so what? Well, really the point isn't about these principles, it's about how you use them. And we want to use them to backcast. So there's a lot of good stories about backcasting. I'm going to tell you one of my favorites. It comes from Nike. A few years ago, Nike leaders were taking stock of what they had done, and they'd made a lot of progress on things like eliminating toxics in their materials, reducing emissions, addressing labor issues in their supply chain. But the leaders were saying, still all these efforts still feel like we're doing less bad rather than more good. That doesn't really fit with the Nike culture. So they decided they would develop a vision of Nike products that would be something to shoot for instead of work away from. They called it their North Star. So I was part of a small team that worked with them and developed the North Star. They wanted their North Star to be fully aligned with those four principles of sustainability. They were backcasting from sustainability principles. They challenged their designers to imagine what would Nike products look like in a future where our business was fully aligned with those four principles. 3 different design teams came up with 3 different ideas. The first one was a Nike shoe that was made entirely of natural, compostable materials. The second team thought, you know what? Nobody's going to buy a hemp shoe. So their concept was a shoe that was still made from petrochemicals, as they are now, but that was designed so that it could be disassembled and the materials reused. A totally recyclable shoe. The third group decided that their future Nike shoe would be 3D printed. So you would walk into a store and select your colors and your designs and have your shoe printed right there. The materials, again, would be able to be reused at the end of their life. Amazing, hey? 3 totally different ideas, all fully aligned with those 4 principles of sustainability. And the point was that backcasting from principles allowed Nike not to have to choose one single future. They didn't have to say, the future is in natural compostable materials. That's where we should go. They could pursue innovations in all of those areas and gradually, step by step, learn their way to a sustainable future, learn their way towards their North Star. I love that example. It's amazing. Now, the story of Nike is an interesting story, and it's a story of a single organization. A lot of them are. But the problem and the challenge, of course, is that most of our sustainability challenges are systemic. They can't be solved by any single organization, even Nike. So it requires organizations and people to be able to work together, and often that means people who aren't used to working together or aren't used to working well together. Can we backcast in systems, just like we can backcast in organizations? We can. In fact, backcasting is the best way to get people mobilized to work towards a common future, even when they're coming from different backgrounds, trying to solve problems together. This is the work that my colleagues and I have been doing for more than 10 years with the Natural Step. 5 years ago, we developed Sustainability Transition Labs. And these are places where we can forge new relationships and trust, where alternative visions can meet, and most importantly, where we can focus on experimentation and innovation. The most audacious of these is happening right here in Alberta. It's the Energy Futures Lab. So there are 40 innovators and influencers from a whole range of backgrounds in the energy system that have come together. Oil and gas, clean tech, First Nations, environmental groups, policymakers, community leaders, right-wingers, left-wingers, goalies. No, just kidding. So what are these people doing together? Well, they are working together to help accelerate the transition to tomorrow's energy system. And they're doing it by backcasting from principles, using those 4 sustainability principles. How did we get them all together? Well, a lab is not a place for negotiation. It's a place for co-creation. So we appealed to people who wanted to be a part of a co-creation, to work together to solve problems rather than exclusively pursue their own agenda. And it turns out there's a lot of people like that. These people are working together and trying to find ways to come together despite the fact that they come from a lot of different backgrounds. Now you might think, does that mean that we're skirting the real issues or avoiding the tough challenges? It doesn't. In fact, backcasting from principles gives us a way to have those tough conversations. And in a lab environment, it's the tough conversations that are the foundation for creativity and innovation. We get people to come together and create ideas, things to do together to work in the common direction, even when they're coming from very different backgrounds. For example, in the Energy Futures Lab, there's a group that is working on radically increasing efficiency in oil and gas production, and there's another group that's working on engaging Albertans in renewable energy projects. All of them see themselves as part of a transition to an energy system that's more fit for the future. And there's some great ideas already developing in the lab. You may have heard of Iron and Earth. These are oil sands workers who are retraining to apply their skills to renewable energy. The lab is giving them an environment to grow and develop their ideas. Another example comes from the interaction of geothermal energy experts with people from more traditional energy companies. They're developing a pilot to generate geothermal energy from an abandoned oil well. So that's just a pilot project, but with 85,000 abandoned oil wells in this province and more than 400,000 oil wells overall, you can see the scale potential for something like that is really large. Another one of the participants is a brilliant chemical engineer who's developing technology to turn carbon dioxide into carbon-based nanofibers. He's working on technology to turn CO2 into yoga mats and concrete. I love that example because it challenges the usual storylines, right? Instead of seeing fossil fuels as only a problem for a sustainable future, and instead of seeing CO2 as waste, why don't we apply our creativity to finding new ways to use CO2 as useful materials? So just like with Nike, in the Energy Futures Lab, we're finding that we don't have to agree on all the details of our desired future, or even on the most strategic pathways to get there. With some shared experience and trust and a common reference point, we can make some serious headway without agreeing on all the details. Now, backcasting from principles doesn't only apply to sustainability. It's a way of problem solving that you can use to make decisions in your own personal life, your families, your neighborhoods, your communities, your teams, and so on. What kind of family environment do we want to cultivate? Or what kind of neighborhood do we want to build as a community? What are our success principles? And how are we going to work towards them? That's backcasting. I think if we can all get better at backcasting in our own lives, then we might stand a chance of being able to do it well in groups. And we really need to if we're going to solve some of these big challenges. Don't forget that, unlike with chess, in the big game of sustainability, we're not playing this game against each other. We're actually facing these challenges together. So we're not likely to find the most creative solutions, the best ideas, if we're only talking to people that we already agree with. Backcasting from principles allows us to imagine multiple futures and allows us to work towards it and innovate towards it. If we're going to achieve what the future requires of us, we need to work together and we need to begin with the end in mind. We need to backcast from sustainability principles. Thank you.